Way back in May of 2019, before the world changed forever, one of the most revealing interviews ever took place on CNBC featuring Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Bill Gates. Whatever you may think of the three, the words spoken during this seemingly uninteresting event laid the foundation for what is to come in the years ahead. A foreshadowing of sorts that, if we look at today, can clearly provide us with evidence of what is to come in a world that has gotten very addicted to the money printer at the Federal Reserve. 27 months later, the global financial environment has experienced a number of shocks that nobody, including these men, maybe with the exception of one, could have ever predicted. Today we look at these three, in particular Mr. Buffett, and analyze their plans for the near term, preparing for a future where the American economy fails. Take a listen to the first guest.
The markets today, obviously things are under a little bit of pressure today, but we have been looking at much higher markets if you go back to the Christmas Eve low, and the concern about what the Fed might or might not be doing. Since that time, the Fed has sounded much more dovish, and I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own take on the markets. And Bill, again, I've spoken with Warren and Charlie earlier about this a little bit. So how about your take? When you hear that the Federal Reserve is probably not going to be raising interest rates anytime soon, how does that change your outlook on equities, or equities versus treasuries?
Well, the interest rate is like gravity, and all these valuations are dramatically affected by it. At the start of the year, people didn't think the 10-year bond would be where it is today, and that's provided a lot of lift. So it was a big first quarter for U.S. equities. We still, if you look forward, are at these very high valuation levels. And so it's hard to see that the market will be gaining a lot over the next few years. I think people should have fairly modest expectations on what their portfolios will make in the years in front of us.
Since that interview on May 6, 2019, Gates has obviously been wrong. The market did gain a lot. The S&P 500 in particular has gone up 55% to new record levels despite falling over 30% in the March of 2020. His theory of markets not producing meaningful returns in the future turned out to be incorrect. But that isn't the end of the story. As you will see when we listen to the other two, their theory on why this may not be the case, why returns may falter in the future, is based on this theory that what Jerome Powell is doing is simply unsustainable. Since May of 2019, all the reasons they give as to why things would get bad have only gotten worse. The US debt has increased significantly, and the money supply has increased exponentially. The most honest man of the bunch, Charlie Munger, had this to say.
Charlie, do you think that?
Well, sure. I think that if you drive interest rates down to zero and all the countries print money like crazy, it's lifted the asset boat for everybody. And I think it really is. So they didn't have anything else to do in the Great Recession, and so they took the only weapon they had and used it aggressively. I don't think we should quarrel with that. It did cause the people who were already rich to get richer, but that wasn't done on purpose or anything like that. And I think that will correct automatically.
Do you think we should still be using that weapon aggressively, which is what President Trump would like to see happen? He wants them to cut interest rates again, I think he said by 1%, and also push up quantitative easing once again. Build up the balance.
I am so afraid of a democracy getting the idea that you can just print money to solve all problems. And eventually, I know that will fail.
So as you just heard there from Charlie Munger, Warren's right-hand man, he agrees with Gates that evaluations have gotten out of control, but he also makes a very important point that this is not the result of pure economic growth, but rather the outrageous policies the majority of governments have put to use. In particular, extreme money printing and 0% interest rates. These policies, according to him, are unsustainable, and if he believed this in 2019, you can only imagine his true opinion now in a post-pandemic world where the Fed policy has gotten exponentially worse in this regard. Despite being a billionaire himself, he admits that these actions have only fueled the growing wealth gap, allowing the top 0.1% to prosper while the middle class gets beaten down. 2020 and 2021 have proved this theory correct, with many billions, possibly trillions of dollars added to the pockets of the world's elite. Next up, the main character, Warren Buffett. I waited to show you Warren's opinion because he's a little less direct than Gates and especially Munger. When he speaks, he picks and chooses his words carefully, so you do have to read between the lines a bit, as he has a particular skill many politicians possess where they can explain a shocking situation in the most calm and collected way possible. Take a listen.
Warren, you share those concerns?
Yeah, I probably could not have conceived of a world as recently as 10 years ago. I would not have conceived of a world where you would have full employment, 5% budget deficits, with actually the probability of those rising from that level, and at the same time have the long bond of 3%. I would have said that couldn't happen.
That was a very boring and politically correct way of saying that right now the policies we are running on the national level are unsustainable and prone to massive problems going forward. Like I mentioned earlier, Warren has a very careful way of saying things, but reading between the lines, it's very clear that this financial experiment we're running, allowing debts to pile up and kicking the can endlessly down the road, is a recipe for a massive disaster that, in my opinion, could cause a depression worse than that of 2008. Sure, these elites will never admit to that, but what he's saying is right in front of our eyes. This right here is pure insanity. Sure, it may be great for the people who own stocks, but it's not based on reality. This is the result of stock market inflation led by Jerome Powell. This line simply cannot continue to literally go straight up. The Buffett indicator, a trusted statistic used by many to evaluate how fairly the markets are priced, is now not only at record highs, but blowing out previous levels, entering territory never ever before seen in the history of finance. But what about the truth that nobody talks about? Buffett, Munger, and likely Gates have all been saying the same exact thing since 2011. The markets are way too overvalued, the Fed policy is outrageous, and this is not suitable long term. At the end of the day, however, they have all been dead wrong for over a decade. The bull market is on year 13 and is showing no signs of slowing down. Each time experts believed that things are, quote, too good to be true, they were proven wrong. Since 2011, the S&P is up 245%. The only large hiccup came in March of 2020 when a worldwide pandemic literally shut down the entire world. So where is the limit? How is Buffett preparing for this massive correction that he claims is basically guaranteed?
The one thing I will say, though, is this is a conversation I feel like we've had for at least 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Where you're watching and continuing to wait for these interest rates, the yields to rise. We're still sitting at 2.5% on the 10-year, which is shocking.
Yeah, and we're sitting with very, very little inflation with a Federal Reserve that put a target for 2% on it not that long ago. And it looks like nirvana. It looks like we found the promised land where we just essentially money doesn't cost anything, and you can print lots of money and have full employment and no inflation. And I would have thought that something would have happened before now. I don't know what would have happened, but I wouldn't think you could have these things at these levels, the long-term rates, inflation rates, budget deficits, and have that be a stable situation for a long period of time. And I still believe that, but so far I'm wrong.
You just saw that smile on Gates' face. It's clear to me that these guys are well aware of the problems we are creating by running the country on this nirvana policy of unlimited money printing. But why go out of your way to speak out against it if you're generating billions as a result of it? The incentives are angled in a way to ensure that rich people continue getting rich by way of asset inflation as a result of loose money policy and generous money printing. And just to show how little they have to lose, take a listen to Munger's last words in this interview. You may not get it right away, but it's a peek into their billionaire minds, as I'll explain later.
I think stocks are ridiculously cheap compared, if you believe that you're going to have the 3% interest, 30-year bonds makes sense.
That's a big if, though.
Well, that's what makes going to work interesting.
Well, this threesome is comfortable if everything goes down by 90%. So we're not a fair cross-section.
I'm sorry, Charlie, what was that?
I say this threesome is comfortable if everything goes down by 90%. It doesn't
stock
really
prices,
hurt us. you
equities
see.
know the rest.
Yeah, but
Stocks are ridiculously cheap if you believe interest rates can remain at zero long term. Warren avoids answering this question if they're cheap or not, but you can find out what he thinks by peeking into his pocketbook. Berkshire, since 2019, has amassed a war chest containing $144 billion. They really haven't purchased much in the past 3 years, and with their actions, they have essentially answered that question. If Buffett truly believed that this growth was continuing, he would have bought and deployed the cash years ago. Instead, he's saving up for the big one. That's why Munger actually comes out and says that the three don't really care if the market crashes 90%. This is actually good for them since they can deploy that cash and buy in at much lower evaluations. That is the Buffett philosophy, value investing. For rich people, a massive recession that would decimate Americans around the country is a celebration, a massive super sale on American equities. The priorities and concerns of the top 1% and the rest of America couldn't be less aligned. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please make sure you hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed. Also, if you're thinking about diversifying some of your net worth into crypto, please consider using my affiliate link for BlockFi below. I've been using their service for almost 3 months now, and I've earned some pretty serious interest on top of some crypto gains.